We all dream of that perfect getaway, don't we? Sun-drenched beaches, peaceful mountain cabins, escaping the everyday grind. A chance to finally relax. But what if that dream vacation, the one you've been counting down the days for, quietly slips into a nightmare? What if the escape you craved suddenly becomes impossible, and the beautiful scenery hides something truly sinister? Tonight, we're diving into 6 terrifying true tales that prove sometimes the most idyllic places can hold the darkest secrets. From a honeymoon that literally ended up in an abandoned resort to unexplained echoes in the Costa Rican canopy, these are the vacations that people barely escaped from. You might just rethink your next booking. If you haven't already, please do check if you're subscribed to the channel. You won't want to miss our future expeditions into the unknown. It was supposed to be a peaceful escape. Just my husband, Mark, and we'd booked Cabin 7B at Whispering Pines Resort, nestled deep in the Blackwood Forest. The online photos had shown a rustic, charming little A-frame with a sweeping view of the lake. It was late September, the air crisp, and carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. Leaves were just starting to turn, splashes of gold and crimson against the deep green. We arrived as the sun dipped below the treetops, painting the sky in fiery oranges and soft purples. The resort office was a small log cabin, smelling faintly of wood smoke. The owner, an older woman with a kind but tired face, handed us the key. Cabin 7B, she said, her voice a low murmur. It's a lovely one. A bit older than the rest, but sturdy. She gave us a quick rundown of the amenities, then added, almost as an afterthought, mind the drafts. It gets a bit breezy in there sometimes. Mark just chuckled, pulling me along. We were ready to unwind. The cabin lived up to its online promise mostly. It was indeed rustic, with rough-hewn logs forming the walls and a large stone fireplace dominating the living room. The view of the lake from the front deck was breathtaking, but there was a curious chill inside, even with the windows closed. It wasn't just the autumn air, it felt different. A subtle cold spot that seemed to follow you. We shrugged it off as an old cabin quirk. The first few days were perfect. We hiked, we read, we cooked simple meals. The nights were quiet, filled only with the chirping of crickets and the distant hoot of an owl. But then, little things started. It began with the rocking chair in the living room. It was an antique, heavy wood, situated facing the fireplace. I'd seen it perfectly still when we went to bed. In the mornings, I'd find it angled slightly, as if someone had just gotten up from it. I'd chalk it up to Mark or the cabin settling, but he denied ever touching it. Then, I distinctly remembered putting my book on the small table next to the rocking chair one evening. The next morning, it was on the armrest of the chair itself. Again, a small thing, a misplaced item. But it created a tiny ripple of unease. Then came the sounds. Rustling in the kitchen. A soft click of a door latch when no one was near it. We'd look at each other, Mark and I, a shared question in our eyes. Did you hear? One of us would ask. The other would reply, having heard nothing. Or worse, both of us having heard the exact same thing, a faint whisper from the hallway, a soft shuffle overhead, but finding only silence when we investigated one afternoon. I was sketching by the window, lost in the intricate patterns of the leaves outside. Mark was out fishing. From the corner of my eye, I saw a flicker of movement. It was quick, like a shadow darting across the periphery of my vision, near the doorway to the bedroom. I turned my head sharply, but there was nothing. Just the empty frame of the door, sunlight streaming in. My heart gave a little thump. I told myself it was my imagination, tired eyes, a trick of the light. But the image of that swift, dark dart lingered that night. Things escalated. We were asleep, the cabin dark except for the faint glow from the moon filtering through the blinds. I woke up to a distinct sound, a slow, deliberate squeak, squeak, squeak. It was the rocking chair in the living room. Moving, I lay perfectly still, my breath catching in my throat. Mark was asleep beside me, his breathing a steady rhythm. The rocking continued, a soft, rhythmic sound cutting through the silence. It wasn't the kind of light, random creak of an old house. This was weighted. Someone was sitting in it. Someone was rocking. My whole body was rigid with fear. I wanted to reach for Mark to shake him awake, but something held me back. The sound was so intimate, so close. It felt like an intrusion, a secret movement happening in the next room, and disturbing it felt dangerous. For what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few minutes, the rocking continued. Then, abruptly, it stopped. The silence that followed was even more oppressive than the rocking. The next morning, I confronted Mark. The rocking, I whispered, my voice hoarse. It was moving last night. I heard it, he looked at me, his face etched with concern. Sarah, you must have been dreaming. No, I insisted, I was wide awake. It was so clear. He tried to reassure me, but I could see the flicker of unease in his eyes. He'd heard the little noises too, seen the displaced items. He just hadn't wanted to admit it. That evening, we decided to build a fire. Maybe the warmth, the light, would dispel the chill. As Mark coaxed the flames to life, I went to the small kitchen to fix us some hot chocolate. I reached for a mug in the cupboard above the sink. Just as my fingers brushed against the ceramic, I heard it. Clear as a bell, directly behind me, a deep, sighing breath. It wasn't Mark, he was still by the fireplace. It was close. So close I felt a faint, cold whisper of air on the back of my neck. My hand froze on the mug. Every hair on my arm stood on end. I closed my eyes, trying to rationalize it away. The cabin settling, the wind, a trick of the acoustics. I took a slow, trembling breath, then turned, slowly. There was nothing there. Just the empty space where the kitchen opened into the living room, but the air around me was undeniably colder. And I had the distinct, overwhelming feeling of being watched, not from a distance, but from right beside me. So close I could almost feel a presence. I didn't scream. I didn't even drop the mug. I just walked back to the living room, my legs feeling like lead, my heart hammering against my ribs. Mark looked up. Everything okay? He asked, noticing my pale face. We need to leave. I said, my voice barely a whisper. Tonight? Now, he saw the genuine terror in my eyes. He didn't argue. Within 20 minutes, we had thrown our things into our bags. The silence in the cabin as we packed was heavy, charged. Every creak of the old wood, every shifting shadow, felt sinister. I half expected the rocking chair to start moving again, or to see that dark flicker pass through a doorway. As we locked the door to cabin 7B, the last rays of sunlight were fading. The cabin looked peaceful from the outside, almost inviting, nestled amongst the towering pines. But I knew what lurked within. We drove away quickly, not looking back. We never told the resort owner exactly why we left in such a hurry. We just cited an unexpected family emergency. The drive home was mostly silent. Mark kept glancing at me, his hand resting on my knee, and even now, months later, I can still feel that cold breath on my neck. I can still hear the slow, rhythmic squeak of that rocking chair in the dead of night. We went to Whispering Pines for peace and quiet. What we found was an unseen guest, a silent, lingering occupant who had no intention of leaving. And a chilling reminder that sometimes, the most peaceful-looking places hold the deepest, darkest secrets. Cabin 7B wasn't just a rental, it was a home, and we were just passing through. The whole idea had been a romantic gesture, or at least, that's what Mark had said. We were celebrating our honeymoon, and instead of a bustling beach resort or a European city, he'd booked us a week at the Grandview Inn and Spa in the Catskills. It wasn't exactly abandoned, he'd clarified, more, historically preserved and recently reopened. When we pulled up, though, abandoned felt like a more accurate description. It was mid-October, and the trees were a riot of orange and crimson, a beautiful, blazing backdrop to the imposing, slightly crumbling stone edifice of the inn. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp leaves and wood smoke from a distance. The Grandview stood on a bluff overlooking a vast, dark lake, its ancient windows like unseeing eyes. The brochure had shown vibrant gardens and happy couples. We found overgrown paths choked with weeds and a single, flickering lantern illuminating a massive, creaking porch swing. There was no one at the reception desk, just a brass bell that echoed loudly through the cavernous lobby when Mark rang it. Dust motes danced in the sparse sunlight filtering through tall, grimy windows. Eventually, a small, hunched man with tired eyes and a perpetually worried frown emerged from a back room. He introduced himself as Arthur, the manager. He seemed almost surprised to see us, as if guests were an unusual occurrence. He handed us a heavy, old-fashioned key. Number 13, our room, was on the third floor, at the very end of a long, dimly lit hallway. The wallpaper peeled in places, and the air was heavy with the smell of old wood and something vaguely metallic. Room 13 was enormous, with a four-poster bed and a tiny, attached sitting room that overlooked the lake. It was charming in a faded, haunted sort of way. I tried to focus on the charming. First few days were quiet. Too quiet, perhaps. We'd hike through the woods, the autumn leaves crunching underfoot, the silence broken only by the caw of distant crows. We'd return to the inn, where Arthur would materialize to offer us lukewarm coffee or a pre-packaged muffin. We rarely saw another soul. There were perhaps 2 other rooms occupied, but we never saw those guests either. It felt like we were the last people on Earth. That's when the sounds started. It began subtly, an almost imperceptible hum that vibrated through the floorboards at night. I chalked it up to the old building settling, the wind. Then came the whispers, soft, indistinct, like a muffled conversation just beyond our door. I'd nudge Mark, but he was always deep in sleep, his breathing even and calm beside me. I'd lie there, straining to hear, but the moment I focused, they'd vanish, leaving only the profound silence of the empty in one evening. After a particularly long hike, I found myself alone in the room while Mark went down to ask Arthur about dinner, which usually consisted of whatever Arthur felt like making. I was unpacking my small backpack when I heard it, a faint, melancholic melody, like a music box playing a tune I couldn't quite place. It seemed to come from inside the walls, or perhaps from the floor above us. I stood very still, listening. It grew louder, clearer, a simple, repetitive lullaby that was both beautiful and incredibly sad. Then, a shudder ran through the floor. A low, prolonged thud, as if something heavy had been dropped. The music stopped abruptly. My heart was hammering. "Mark!" I called out, my voice sounding impossibly small in the large room. There was no answer. I considered going to find him, but an odd paralysis had set in. I just stood there, breathing shallowly, waiting. When Mark finally returned, clanking with cheap plates of lukewarm pasta, I didn't say anything about the music. I didn't want him to think I was being silly, or worse, that I was regretting our unconventional honeymoon. The humming intensified that night. It vibrated through the mattress, a low, unnerving drone that made my teeth ache. I kept my eyes on the door, sure that someone was out there, on the other side. Then came the scratching. It was faint at first, a light, rhythmic tap-tap-tap coming from the wall beside the bed. I tried to convince myself it was a mouse, but it wasn't scurrying. It was insistent, methodical, as if something was slowly, deliberately trying to get through. I pulled the sheets tighter around me, my eyes wide open in the darkness. Mark was still asleep, oblivious. How could he sleep through this? The scratching grew louder, like fingernails dragging across plaster, then something harder. Slowly, a pattern emerged. A series of short taps, then a pause, then a longer drag. It sounded like someone trying to write on the wall, or carve. My breath hitched. I squeezed my eyes shut, wishing it would stop. It didn't. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. Trembling, I reached over and shook Mark awake. His eyes fluttered open sleepily. "What is it?" he mumbled. "Listen," I whispered, gripping his arm. "Can't you hear that?" He lay still for a moment, listening. The scratching was still there, a chilling constant. "Hear what, babe?" he asked, his voice thick with sleep. He turned to me, a confused frown creasing his forehead. My blood ran cold. He couldn't hear it. Suddenly, a violent shudder ripped through the entire room. The old furniture groaned, the glass in the window panes rattled furiously. A low, guttural moan filled the air, so loud it seemed to vibrate in my bones. It was a sound of immense sorrow, of deep despair. And then something else. A high-pitched, childish scream, instantly cut off. I threw myself against Mark, burying my face in his chest. He was wide awake now, his arms tight around me. "What was that?" he whispered, his voice laced with genuine fear. He could hear that. He really could. The moaning continued, swelling and receding like a tide. I felt a cold breath on the back of my neck, though no window was open. The room grew colder, the scent of damp earth and something sweet, like wilting flowers, filling the air. "We have to go," I choked out, tears streaming down my face. "We have to go now." Mark scrambled out of bed, grabbing our emergency bag, a small backpack with our wallets and phones we'd always kept packed, a habit from a shaky camping trip. He fumbled with the old-fashioned lock on the door, his hands shaking. The moaning intensified, now sounding closer, almost right outside, as he finally unlatched it. A sudden gust of wind, smelling faintly of formaldehyde, slammed into us, blowing the heavy door wide open. In the dim hallway at the far end stood a small, indistinct figure. It was shrouded in shadow, but I could make out a pale, almost translucent hand reaching out towards us. And then I heard the faint, distant strains of that melancholic music box melody. Coming from where the figure stood, Mark didn't hesitate. He pulled me out of the room, slamming the door shut with a force that rattled the entire floor. We didn't even bother trying to get the elevator. We ran down the creaking staircase, our footsteps echoing loudly in the silent hall. As we passed the second floor, I swore I heard muffled weeping emanating from one of the other occupied rooms, the ones we never saw guests leave. We burst out into the pre-dawn chill, the crisp air a sudden, blessed relief after the suffocating dread of the inn. Our rental car was parked alone in front of the grand, decaying facade. We jumped in, Mark fumbling with the keys, his hands still trembling. As he started the engine, I looked back at room 13. The light from a single flickering street lamp reflected off the window, and for a fleeting moment, I saw a pale, small face pressed against the glass, watching us leave. We drove for hours without speaking, the sun gradually rising, painting the sky in soft mauves and oranges that felt completely alien after the impenetrable darkness of the inn. We never went back. We still don't talk much about it, not really. Sometimes, late at night, when the house is still, I think I can hear the faintest humming just at the edge of my hearing, and the soft, rhythmic scratching. Mark still tells me he doesn't hear it, but I know what I heard, and I know what I felt. Our honeymoon was supposed to be a celebration of new beginnings. Instead, it showed me that some endings, some echoes, never truly fade away. If these stories gave you a true shiver down your spine, just hit that like button. It tells me what kind of narratives you want to hear more of. The summer I turned 16, my parents tried something different. Instead of our usual crowded amusement park trips, they booked a small cottage on Emerald Beach. Think of it, no lines, just sand and sun, my mom had said, her voice full of a hopeful cheer that instantly made me suspicious. My dad, ever the realist, added, and maybe some peace and quiet for a change. Emerald Beach wasn't exactly on the main tourist maps. It was a stretch of the coast tucked away behind a dense, almost primeval-looking patch of pine forest, known more for its wild, untamed beauty than for bustling boardwalks. Our cottage was quaint, a little ramshackle, with sun-bleached paint and a porch swing that groaned as if in protest every time I sat on it. The air always smelled of salt and the damp earth of the pine woods, a scent that was strangely comforting at first. The first few days were idyllic. We spent hours beachcombing, the sand cool between my toes, an endless canvas for the waves to redraw. My dad, who was usually glued to his phone, actually put it away and tried to teach me how to skip stones. My mom, a notoriously bad swimmer, even waded out past her knees, laughing as the waves slapped at her thighs. It was the kind of family vacation postcards are made of. Our small, secluded section of Emerald Beach had a peculiar feature. A cluster of enormous, gnarled driftwood logs, bleached bone-white by the sun and sea. They were too heavy to move, seemingly anchored to the very earth. We started to call it the driftwood graveyard. It was a natural curiosity, a place where the ocean seemed to deposit its most ancient, imposing offerings. Sometimes, if the tide was out far enough, you could walk around them and see the intricate patterns the water had etched into their surfaces. One afternoon, the tide was unusually low, exposing a much wider expanse of beach than we had seen before. The air was still, heavy with a kind of anticipatory quiet. My dad, ever the explorer, decided we should go investigate the further reaches of the driftwood graveyard. Who knows what treasures the ocean has left behind today? He joked as we approached. The peaceful silence of the beach seemed to thicken, almost pressing in on us. The usual cries of gulls were muted, distant. A strange, metallic smell, faint but distinct, began to prick at the back of my nose. It wasn't exactly unpleasant, but it felt wrong, somehow, like a scent that didn't belong on a sun-drenched beach. Curiosity overriding any sense of unease, we started carefully picking our way around the base of the largest driftwood log, a truly ancient-looking behemoth that resembled a petrified sea monster. That's when my dad noticed it barely visible, almost completely hidden by the overlapping roots of the driftwood, was what looked like a dark, angular depression in the sand. "Looks like something might be buried here," he murmured, his voice low, almost contemplative. My mom, always the cautious one, suggested we leave it be. Probably just some old trash, dear. Let's not disturb it. But my dad, a childhood adventurer at heart, was already reaching for a small, overturned piece of driftwood to use as a makeshift shovel. I caught up in the thrill of discovery, knelt beside him, my eyes wide. The sand, surprisingly, was loose, almost yielding. With each scoop, the strange metallic scent grew stronger, now mingled with something else, something earthy and sweet, like disturbed soil after a summer rain. And then the shovel hit something hard. My dad scraped away a little more sand, and a dark, polished surface emerged. It was smooth, almost obsidian-like, but with a faint, iridescent sheen in the sunlight. It looked unnatural, unlike any rock or shell I had ever seen. "What is that?" I whispered, a shiver running down my spine despite the warmth of the sun. He cleared a larger section, and the object revealed itself further. It wasn't a single, monolithic piece. It was segmented, like scales, but too large, too perfectly geometric for any animal. And as he dug deeper, revealing more of its strange, alien form, a subtle, almost imperceptible hum began to vibrate in the air around us. It was a low frequency, more felt than heard, resonating deep in my chest. Even the sand beneath my knees seemed to hum. My mom suddenly called out, her voice sharp with alarm. "Stop. Just stop, both of you." She was pointing, not at the object, but at something else behind the exposed portion of the strange object. The sand was moving. Not shifting with the wind, but actively pulsing, as if something enormous was breathing just beneath the surface. Small, perfectly round ripples spread outwards from the spot, like a slow, deliberate heartbeat. The metallic, earthy scent intensified, becoming almost sickly sweet, and then a sound. It was very faint at first, a high-pitched, guttural keen that seemed to emanate from the very sand itself. It was a sound that didn't belong to any animal I knew, a sound that made the hairs on my arms stand on end and sent a bolt of pure, primal fear shooting through me. My dad dropped the driftwood shovel. His face was pale, his eyes wide and unblinking. The air grew colder around us, even as the sun beat down. The hum intensified, a low thrumming that almost drowned out the rhythmic pulsing of the sand. The ground around the object started to fissure, thin lines appearing in the damp sand, spreading outwards like a spider web. And from one of these fissures, a dark liquid, thick and viscous, began to ooze. It looked like crude oil, but it gleamed with that same unnatural iridescence we'd seen on the buried object. "We need to go," my mom said, her voice barely a whisper, but laced with an urgency that sliced through the strange atmosphere. She didn't wait for an answer. She grabbed my hand, then tugged at my dad's arm. We ran. We didn't look back. The keen sound followed us for a few agonizing moments, seeming to stretch and warp in the still air, before finally fading as we scrambled away from the driftwood graveyard. We didn't go back to that part of the beach for the rest of our vacation. We stuck to the area directly in front of our cottage, always casting nervous glances down the shore towards the gnarled logs. The metallic, earthy smell seemed to linger in the air, a phantom scent I couldn't shake. When we left Emerald Beach, packing our bags in silence, the hum seemed to echo in my ears, a low thrum that I sometimes still feel on quiet nights. My parents never talked about what we found, not directly. But sometimes, I'd catch them exchanging a look, a shared flicker of fear and understanding. Emerald Beach still calls to me sometimes, in the quiet moments when my mind wanders. A part of me wants to know what was buried beneath that ancient driftwood. A larger, more sensible part of me knows that some things are meant to stay hidden, beneath the sand, beneath the waves, echoing only in the silent corners of our memory. I haven't been back since, and I don't think I ever will. The thought of that strange hum, that unearthly keen, and the pulsing earth is enough to keep me away from Emerald Beach forever. The summer I turned 18, my best friend, Chloe, and I decided to ditch the overpriced beach resorts and go camping. We were looking for something truly off the beaten path, a real adventure before college applications swallowed us whole. After poring over maps and trekking guides, we found it. A remote, almost forgotten national park nestled deep in the Appalachian Mountains. Its main draw was a series of natural springs, rumored to be crystal clear and untouched. We arrived on a sweltering July afternoon, the air thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. Our campsite, nestled beside a gurgling creek, felt idyllic. The cicadas sang their perpetual summer song, and the only other sounds were the rustle of leaves and the occasional call of a distant bird. We spent the first few days hiking, exploring hidden trails, and just basking in the quiet. It was exactly what we'd hoped for: pure, uncomplicated tranquility. Then we found the spring. It wasn't on any map we'd seen, hidden behind a dense thicket of rhododendrons and ancient, gnarled oaks. The air around it felt cooler, almost unnaturally so, even in the midday heat. When we finally pushed through the last curtain of leaves, we gasped. The water was unlike anything I'd ever seen, a mesmerizing, almost luminous turquoise, so clear you could see every pebble on its bottom, even in the deeper sections. It was surrounded by smooth, moss-covered rocks, and wisps of mist seemed to perpetually cling to its surface, even though the air felt still. "My God, Chloe," I whispered, It's magical. Chloe, usually the more cynical of us, just stared, her mouth slightly agape. It's unreal, she breathed. The temptation was irresistible. We peeled off our hiking clothes and with barely a word waded in. The water was shockingly cold at first, a jolt that made our skin prickle, but then it settled into a pleasant, refreshing chill. It felt incredibly soft against my skin, almost silky. We laughed, splashing each other, feeling like two kids who'd stumbled into a secret world. We swam for what felt like hours, letting the current, subtle as it was, carry us gently around the shallow pool. As the sun began to dip, casting long, fractured shadows across the tree line, a strange feeling began to settle over me. It wasn't exactly unpleasant, more like a growing awareness. The water, which had felt so refreshing, now seemed to cling to my skin in a way that was almost clingy. When I ran my fingers through my hair, it felt unusually heavy, strangely slick. "Chloe," I said, treading water, "doesn't your skin feel different?" She rubbed her arm. "Yeah, like really, really clean. And a little tingly." She paused, then added, "And my hair feels like it's gained 5 pounds. We laughed it off, attributing it to the natural minerals in the spring. That night, back at our tent, was the first time things felt off. We were exhausted but wide awake. The cicadas chirping, which had been so soothing, now sounded amplified, needle-sharp. Every rustle in the leaves outside our tent made us jump. I kept experiencing phantom chills, as if the water from the spring was still clinging to me. I noticed Chloe constantly running her hands through her hair, her brow furrowed. "It just feels wrong," she mumbled at one point, not looking at me. Still wet somehow? The next morning, neither of us felt rested. My skin felt perpetually damp, no matter how much I tried to towel it dry. It was an internal dampness, a deep-seated chill that seemed to radiate from my bones. When I looked at Chloe across the small campfire, I noticed something strange about her eyes. They seemed darker somehow, less reflective. "You look like you saw a ghost," I said, trying for a light tone. She just stared into the flames. "I keep thinking about the spring," she said in a low voice. "I can still feel the water on me, everywhere." Over the next few days, the changes became more pronounced. The dampness never left. Our skin, which had been sun-kissed and healthy, now looked subtly translucent, almost pallid. Our hair, once vibrant, had developed a strange, aquatic sheen, and it felt impossibly heavy. We stopped wanting to eat, the thought of food making our stomachs churn. All we wanted was to be near water, to feel the cool embrace of the creek near our campsite, though it never felt as satisfying as the spring hour voices, usually full of energy, grew quieter, softer, almost like echoes. We stopped laughing. When we spoke, it was often about the spring, a strange, obsessive longing for it. We found ourselves constantly touching our skin, running our fingers over our arms and legs, as if trying to smooth out some invisible roughness. Our movements became slower, more deliberate, almost graceful, like something moving through water. One afternoon, Chloe was sitting by the creek, her feet submerged. I watched her from the tent. Her hair, long and dark, floated around her shoulders like seaweed. Her eyes, now undeniably black, stared blankly at the water's surface. A strange, almost imperceptible shift had occurred in her jawline, subtly rounding it, making her features seem. "Chloe," I called out, my own voice sounding strangely breathy, unfamiliar. She didn't respond. She just leaned forward, dipping her face closer to the water, her lips barely skimming the surface. A shiver went through me, not of cold, but of profound unease. This wasn't the Chloe I knew. This wasn't me either. The chill within me intensified, and I felt an inexplicable urge to return to the spring. A powerful, insistent pull. That night, lying in the tent, I heard Chloe stir. She crawled out of her sleeping bag, her movements fluid and silent. I pretended to be asleep, my heart hammering against my ribs. I heard the tent flap unzip, a soft swish. Then the rhythmic padding of bare feet on pine needles, heading away from our campsite, deeper into the woods. I knew where she was going. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that she was returning to the spring. And an even more terrifying knowledge settled over me. I wanted to follow her. The pervasive dampness in my body, the constant chill, the dull ache in my joints, it all seemed to be screaming for the water. The thought of it filled me with a sudden, overwhelming sense of comfort, a yearning that overshadowed all fear. I lay there for a long time, listening to the sounds of the night, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The idea of the spring, its luminous turquoise depths, was like a siren song in my mind. I could almost feel its cool embrace, hear its silent invitation. It promised an end to the pervasive chill, a final release from the unsettling changes that had taken hold of us. When the first gray light of dawn filtered through the trees, I finally found the strength to move. I crawled out of the tent, my limbs feeling heavy but propelled by an almost hypnotic urge. Chloe was gone. Her sleeping bag was empty, the tent flap still slightly ajar. I followed the faint trail, not really seeing the path, but feeling the pull, the undeniable magnetism of the spring. It didn't take long to find it. The mist was thicker around it this morning, swirling hypnotically. Chloe was in the water, submerged up to her neck, her unblinking black eyes staring ahead. Her face was serene, almost ethereal, and her skin seemed to glow faintly, reflecting the luminous turquoise. "Chloe?" I whispered, my voice hardly audible. She turned her head slowly, a faint, unseeing smile on her lips. She raised a hand, her fingers subtly elongated and pale, and extended it towards me. It was an invitation, my breath caught in my throat. I stood at the edge of the spring, the cool, damp air chilling me to my core. Part of me, the part that was still human, screamed in terror. But a deeper, more primal part of me, the part that had been subtly transformed, felt a profound sense of peace. The water beckoned, promising ultimate belonging, freedom from the constant, unsettling awareness of being unsuited for dry land. I don't remember taking the first step. I only remember the feeling of the water wrapping around my ankles, then my knees, the exquisite chill like a lover's embrace. The dampness within me finally found its match, and the constant ache began to subside. As the water rose higher, the last remnants of my human fear dissolved, replaced by a strange, peaceful acceptance. I spent the rest of that summer in the spring, a silent sentinel, the water a part of me and I a part of it. I sometimes see the hikers, their bright, dry clothes stark against the dappled light of the forest. They pass by, oblivious just as we once were. They laugh, their voices sharp and jarring, and they talk about returning to their dry homes, their normal lives. I watch them, and I feel nothing but a faint, almost pitying detachment. They don't know the secrets the water holds. They don't know the quiet peace, the profound belonging it offers. They don't know what it means to shed the useless skin of humanity and become something more adaptable. Sometimes, a curious one will push through the rhododendrons, drawn by the shimmering light. Their eyes will widen just as ours did. And I will watch along with Chloe and the others as they step into the water, feeling that first shock of cold, then the irresistible pull, and then the welcome calm. Another one joins the silence. Another becomes part of the spring. We don't speak, we don't need to. The water hums our truth, a constant, gentle song beneath the surface. And we wait, we always wait. Do you believe these strange occurrences could be real, or is there a rational explanation we're missing? Discuss your theories down below. The summer I turned 18, my parents decided we needed a real break. Not some theme park getaway or a crowded city tour, but a proper, unplugged escape. They booked a tiny, isolated villa on Isla Hermosa, an island so small it barely registered on most maps, somewhere off the coast of Central America. "It'll be good for you, Anna," my mom had said. "Disconnect. See something real." Isla Hermosa truly was beautiful. Lush, green jungle met turquoise waters, and the air hummed with the sound of exotic birds and the distant, rhythmic crash of waves. Our villa was tucked away in a grove of palm trees, with a porch that overlooked a secluded stretch of beach. For the first few days, it was pure bliss. My phone had no signal, and I found myself actually reading books, swimming in the warm ocean, and watching the spectacular sunsets paint the sky every evening. It felt like a dream, a place where time didn't quite exist. The only other humans we regularly encountered were the family who owned the general store in the island's sole tiny village, about a half-hour walk down a dusty path. They were kind, quiet people, used to vacationers looking for solitude. My dad loved haggling for fresh fish, and my mom enjoyed picking out strange, colorful fruits I'd never seen before midway through our second week. A storm blew in. Not a terrifying hurricane, just a persistent, heavy tropical rain that lasted for 2 days straight. The air became thick, humid, and the jungle around our villa turned into a dripping, whispering presence. Everything felt closer, more enclosed. It was during this storm that I started to feel off. It began subtly, a faint, almost imperceptible scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic and sharp, like old blood, that would drift in on the breeze even when the windows were closed. I'd sniff the air, frown, and then it would be gone. My parents didn't notice it. The strange feelings grew. I'd be reading on the porch, listening to the rain, and catch glimpses out of the corner of my eye, a flicker in the dense foliage, like someone was passing by, just beyond my line of sight. I'd snap my head up, but there would be nothing but the rain-slicked leaves. One afternoon, while my parents were napping, I was making myself a snack in the kitchen. The villa was old, with creaky floorboards. I distinctly heard a slow, dragging sound coming from the living room, like something heavy being pulled across the tiled floor. My heart hammered. "Dad!" I called out, but there was no reply. I crept to the doorway, peering into the shadows. Nothing, the sound had stopped. I tried to tell myself it was the old house settling or just the wind playing tricks. But the feeling of being watched intensified. I felt it most strongly when I was alone, which, on Isla Hermosa, was frequently. It was a cold prickle on the back of my neck, a sense of immense, suffocating presence just outside the visible spectrum. The day the storm broke was also the day we were due to leave. The sky was a brilliant, washed-clean blue, the air fresh and vibrant. Before the water taxi arrived to take us back to the mainland, my mom wanted to collect some seashells as souvenirs. My dad, ever the planner, was already packing the last of our bags. I decided to join my mom on the beach. The sand was cool beneath my bare feet. The waves were gentle, pushing up beautiful, intact shells onto the shore. "Look at this one, Anna," my mom called, holding up a perfect conch, its inner lip a shocking pink. I smiled, bending down to pick up a particularly shiny, iridescent shell. That's when I saw it. Just half buried in the wet sand, a short distance from the waterline, was a small, crudely carved wooden figurine. It was dark, almost black, and looked like a stylized person, arms held stiffly at its sides, with deep, blank eyes. It wasn't intricate or beautiful. It was rough, ancient-looking, like something a child might carve, but with an unsettling stillness about it. "Mom, look at this," I said, picking it up. The wood felt strangely smooth, almost oily, despite being wet. And it was cold, colder than the damp sand around it. The metallic, earthy smell I had noticed earlier suddenly hit me full force, emanating from the figurine. It was sickeningly strong now, making my stomach churn. My mom turned, squinting. "Oh, that's interesting. A local carving, maybe? Quite rustic." She didn't seem to notice the smell. I held it, turning it over in my fingers. As I did, my thumb brushed against its back. Relief washed over me, a shuddering release, as if a tight band around my chest had suddenly snapped. Oh, thank goodness, my breath hitched. It wasn't relief. It was its relief. As if the thing I was holding was finally free. Just then, my dad shouted from the villa, "Water taxi's here. Let's go." Mom and I gathered our few finds and hurried back. Amidst the rush of loading bags and saying quick goodbyes to the island, I tucked the little wooden figure into my backpack, intending to ask about it later or maybe just keep it as a peculiar memento. The boat ride was choppy. As we pulled away from Isla Hermosa, the island shrinking behind us, I felt an inexplicable sense of dread, as if I was leaving behind part of myself, but also taking something unwanted with me back home. Life resumed its normal pace. But the feeling of being watched never left. It became a constant companion, a silent shadow just behind my shoulder. The faint smell would return, usually when I was alone in my room, studying or just lying in bed. I'd occasionally hear the dragging sound. My sleep became restless, fragmented by unsettling dreams I could never fully remember. Once I woke one evening, about a month after we returned, I was trying to study for a history test. The old wooden figurine sat on my desk, forgotten amidst my books. I glanced at it, and for the first time, really looked at its blank face. The eyes were just smooth indentations, yet they seemed to bore into me, fixed, unblinking. The metallic, earthy smell filled my room, overpowering everything. A cold dread seeped into my bones. I felt it then, no longer as a vague presence but as a distinct, heavy weight behind me, pressing closer. The air in the room grew colder, noticeably so, even though the window was closed. I could feel the hairs on my arms rising. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't dare turn around. I just stared at the figurine, paralyzed. And then I heard it. A faint, almost inaudible whisper, seemingly right beside my ear. It wasn't a language I recognized, but the tone was unmistakable, ancient, malevolent, and chillingly possessive. It sounded like a sigh of deep satisfaction. I finally managed to rip my gaze away from the figurine, my eyes darting frantically around the room. Nothing, just the shadows thrown by my desk lamp. But the whisper seemed to echo in my head, fading slowly until only the silence remained, thick and oppressive. My eyes fell back on the figurine. It felt like an extension of the darkness in the room. This wasn't some quaint souvenir. It was a vessel. And whatever had been trapped on Isla Hermosa, whatever had been watching me, had found its way out, clinging to the first thing that offered it passage. That night, I put the figurine in a shoebox, wrapped it in multiple layers of old t-shirts, and buried it deep in the garden, under the ancient oak tree in our backyard. I didn't tell my parents, didn't tell anyone. It felt too insane, too unbelievable. The strange smells and sounds lessened after that, but they never truly disappeared. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear the faintest drag from downstairs. Sometimes, a gust of wind carries that sharp, metallic scent to my window. And sometimes, when I'm alone in a room, I feel that familiar, bone-chilling cold, as if something very old, very patient, is just standing there, waiting. Because some souvenirs, once picked up, simply refuse to be left behind, no matter how deep you bury them. They just wait for their moment to resurface. And Isla Hermosa, it had given me the final, darkest souvenir of all. And so, our vacation ends, but the lingering dread often remains. If you found yourself caught in the grip of these stories, consider subscribing. By joining our growing number of discerning listeners, you ensure you're always alerted to our latest investigations into the truly horrifying. Subscribe now to continue the journey.